Hey guys, this is Kirob speaking, and today we're back in Moonshine Inc. And this video is going to be a little different than the 20 episodes or so that I've been doing on this game before. What we're talking about today is some of my thoughts on how to vastly improve this game's game mechanics. And for those of you who have not seen the game in action before, I'm quickly going to review what the main puzzle of the game is, and then how pieces are connected or not connected, and then come to a few conclusions and make a few suggestions, which I've already shared with the developers who had an open ear for those. Anyway, let's get into it. So first I want to give you a general overview of what this game's core mechanics are about, and I'm going to keep this brief as I'm assuming that most of you already know what we're talking about here. But it is of course a game about brewing various beverages, and those are of course alcoholic as well. High ethanol contents. We can make moonshines, brandies, whiskies, and vodkas. And well, for that you need certain ingredients. And let's cook up something here. We are following a recipe that we are already knowing, and we are trying to create a certain taste profile by adding certain ingredients and just shift the balance between them so that we do match a certain taste profile. So we're taking this one for example, vegetariana, and we have here just rice and carrots, and we're going to combine those into this big metal tank for fermentation. And we have to choose our yeast and the split between the ingredients. This one turns out to be quite simple, as we can just set the profile about right and then turn up the yeast, and we see that we're getting a really damn good match for the taste profile. So that one was easy. It's not always that easy, but in general that is what you're doing. You're trying to make out the puzzle pieces for how do you get the match of this taste profile. The very next step is to set up the fermentation process. And in that fermentation process, you have to decide exactly what subtype of yeast you do want to use, where depending on the yeast, you are adding certain flavors to it. In this case, we're adding with the Turbo Kindle, we're adding some sweet and acrid tastes, and as you can see, we can vary this with the temperature that the fermentation is going to happen at. So once you have settled on enough produce in there and have set up your fermentation, you can start it out and just create it. And then we have to wait until it's fermented. That can take a while. And when finally time has come, you're going to set up distillation, the flame rate of your distillery, and then you can choose which cuts you want to take. So in this case, as you can see there, we have too much sweetness in this. So I'm going to take out a jar of sweetness, and that is significantly improving the match rating there. In this case, it was very easy. I just had to remove this one, and you can go pretty far out there and deliberately add tastes and so on, which you then later can partially remove and so on. Pretty cool stuff. So also there are requirements on what you need in terms of count on the heads, hearts and tails at the minimum. But that's usually not very restrictive, at least if you're not doing this. So here we go. We have that selected, and once we are done here, we can just click create and it will make this blend. And then we have arrived for setting up the actual bottling process. Very easy that. We have a perfect match here, and then we can add either water or neutral spirits to it so that we get the correct ethanol content, because right now we are sitting at 61% and this one is known to have about 40. So what we're just going to do here is pull that down to be exactly 40, and we have a match of 99%, recipe matched, and quality 98%. And then you can set the price, and it's all good. Best bang for your buck. There you go. And we bottle it. And that's it. So those are the core mechanics. But what problems do I see with those? Let's take a closer look. And I'm going to start off with a little bit of a tangent that is looping back into and becoming relevant for what I'm going to talk about. It is quite easy to get a very close to perfect match of the recipes. So for instance, we're going to make a what's the fruit, and we have orange, banana and lemons. And then we just need to choose the correct apparatus, and then a big metal tank there. What the fruit, match, you see the profile there, that's all good. Choose this one, and now we need to play around a little with the sliders and with the selection of the yeast, of course. So we see that, oh, look at that. Well, this is a pretty good match, but we can't really get there. And that is cool. And now you've seen the exception, not the rule. Usually, it is quite easy to get there. This is just limited because we haven't moved to the final chapter yet and unlocked the premium yeast. This is actually a pretty nice challenge. It does require you to think ahead. It does require you to know a little bit more about the process, and that's really cool. More of that is needed. Usually, you can just blindfold it from here on out and it becomes just clicking through. A no-brainer. Because if you get a perfect match, let's see what all falls at the wayside. So you see up here, they have a little bit of a hint which tastes these yeasts do add. And what we are looking for with our current taste profile that we were seeking out is to add some sweet and bitter, I believe it was, right? So let's see if we can do that. An important piece of the puzzle is the current temperature and the optimal temperature. The problem here is, and I'm going to highlight this as problem number 1, optimal temperature doesn't add any additional taste. That is a big oversight, I would say, because it makes it absolutely trivial for almost all recipes. Because as long as you have from the pure ingredients a perfect match, you never need to touch it anymore. So here I have played a little bit of a game of adjusting the slider up and down till the profile matches, and it's completely randomized, and it is a arthritis pain in the wrist to get the pixel right. It's not a fun mechanic the way it is implemented, but you can get 99% matches there without problem, even if you don't have the yeast. So now I'm just going to create this one, and then, well, we have to wait a long time, and then set up the actual distillation. Okay, there we go. Now we have solved the puzzle, the not really puzzle, the test of patience of finding the correct pixel. That was the previous puzzle. We now have the non-puzzle of having to choose what cuts to take. The answer will always be all of them. So why is that? Well, it's simple. We don't want to touch the taste profile anymore. It is perfect as is. This, by the way, I would say is by far the coolest game mechanic in the game. The selection of slices which are dynamically generated as you change the flame rate, that's really cool stuff. And you have to try out a few different combinations and such, and this should really give you a hard time in terms of finding an acceptable and good combination. And maybe sometimes the absolute perfect one where you can get like really happy that you've found a really solid solution to it. This is not the case at all. This is the best puzzle in the game, and it's just being cut out of the game. As soon as you can have control over the heating of your fermentation, or the temperature of your fermentation, goes both ways, cooling and heating, it basically is a non-issue. The best puzzle in the game is being made obsolete. So what you do is, of course, just set it to maximum flame rate, because that just makes the process a little faster. And now we can set up the bottling. And here comes the problem the second problem that is massive. So you see, we have an ethanol content of 59%, and this one wants to have 25. Slight issue there, isn't it? No, not according to the game mechanics at the moment. That's a massive flaw. Let's take a look what happens. So really, what we need to do here is pour... Let's take a look. How much? So we are pouring 282 liters of water into that. And it was originally 239. So yeah, of course you need to pour equal amounts of water in there so that you get it down. It's just a mixing ratio, right? And diluting it out to 511 liters from the original 239 is not affecting taste whatsoever. So now, I have the trivial puzzle here to just choose the correct amount of water to put in there. There's absolutely no weighing of advantages and disadvantages. It's just like, yeah, you have to do it and then it comes out perfect, and that's all good, as well as you can make it. Also, this is without any employee bonuses, so we just made a 98% premium brandy that we didn't have the correct yeast for, and we can sell it for bonkers money, of course. It's bonkers quantity for bonkers money. And there was no challenge in it beyond finding the original correct combination of fruit and then, or rather ingredients to keep it general, and then being smart enough to choose the right yeast for the process. So adjust the profile correctly, and then choose the correct yeast, and then just slide the slider until you find the correct solution, and that's it. There was not really a challenge in this beyond that very first step. And like I said, that very first step for this one is the absolute exception, not the rule. The rule is that it's trivial there too. And again, what do I mean by trivial? I mean that you can easily find the perfect solution for the taste profile by just having the correct ingredients and the available yeasts that you can choose. Alright, that sounds all quite negative, doesn't it? It doesn't have to be, because the underlying mechanics that are already there, I actually find are excellent. It is just how pretty much disconnected they are, disjointed they are, that is breaking the game. And there are easy fixes for that within the scope of the game. The first thing that I'm advocating for is a very, very simple thing. It is pretty much the changing of a condition that needs to be met. And that is the matching of the recipe, of the taste. What I want the player to be able to do is to progress without having a match for the currently selected recipe. That should be a warning, not a blocking thing. You have to have a recipe match to create this batch. For the higher up ones, for the more difficult ones, you do need to have pretty tight matches to even be allowed to progress. I think that is just a little bit of a slap in the face to the more advanced players who know the mechanics and want to try and via tricky and advanced fermentation and knowledge of the game, trying to create something that's just right with not the correct setup. And that is super interesting within this game, if it were possible. And we have seen a little glimpse of that with the What the Fruit that I brewed. I had to set it to a certain point so that the yeast could add the rest. So let's take this one with a terrible match. Of course, it's very easy to get the perfect one, but let's take this terrible match and continue on and assume that this was now just unlocked because it allowed us that thing. Now we can set up the fermentation for this process. This next step is the core of my suggestion for how this whole system can be fixed and interlinked properly within the already existing game mechanics to make something that is making game mechanics obsolete to making game mechanics super important and rewarding. Alright, let's take a look at this system. In more detail. We have already seen its flaws. If you're ending up at the correct temperature, you basically find steps where you have, it's actually dirty equipment that does this at the moment, because we have non-cleaned tank and broken metal tank there. It is not giving us the perfect cleanliness, but what I want to see is, even at perfect cleanliness and at optimum temperature, that there are never any solutions that don't add additional tastes depending on what yeast you select. What I'm advocating for is something like this. You are having the optimal temperature in this chart in the middle. That adds just minor amounts of tastes. And now take a look back at the main screen here. This is the timeline that I'm referring to. It's the ethanol versus sugar timeline. The fermentation process in action as the taste points are being added down there. So this is what you're seeing in my little example. As you move further away from the optimal temperature, you are gaining taste points. They are added to it, but they are never disappearing. Also, as you can see, going higher does add different ones than going lower. This would be based on a seed of randomized numbers that is unique to the batch, so basically the batch ID, as they already do with the randomization that is currently in the game, which is, as you can see here, well, the pixel-based nonsense. Also, as you can see, I would introduce quarter points, so becoming even more fine-grained, so that you don't really have an opportunity to start out with a perfect match for the recipe, and then continue on and always keep that thing in place. It should be either very hard or very lucky for you to get to a position where you can just from the start to finish always keep the taste profile constant. Oh, okay, we were actually at the wrong temperature for the simple blast. It does indicate the optimal temperature for a certain spot, but then that spot is only applicable to the first one. They do have different optimal spots. So indeed you can see that this one has, it has zeros in there, pretty close to the center, even with the contamination. And this one is straight up zero there as well. It doesn't add anything. Something else to keep in mind is how much ethanol is being generated. That is going to be my third point. Because you can steer this by the mash amount versus water amount. And of course, at the moment, it is such that you always want to have the maximum mash amount possible for the yeast that you have. So they have a maximum sugar amount, and that is exactly what you always want to use at this moment. So there is no choice. There is no pro and con to this. There's just a pro, and that is maximizing the mash amount for the amount of water and then filling up the tank. So also no choice really, but I'm going to get back to this for my third point, and that one is coming up now. Let's see us selecting this and then creating some slices. And there we are. Now we are in a situation where we have to choose. How are we going to make this work? Do we have any jars that are reducing accurate by the most? Yes, we do. That was quite lucky, but it's only in this one. And that is one of our best jars right there. There we have another one. That one is pretty good, but we do need to remove some others there as well then. So that might hurt a little. Now there's a lot more choice in here. Let's see. Maybe this one, it's not doing enough. Maybe this one then as well. Yeah. Then there you go, they have a 90% match. That's already a lot better, right? And you can try to find the best combinations for at different flame rates, because they are a little bit randomized, and just try to find where how to solve this puzzle the best way, and always weigh the advantages and disadvantages, because what I'm going to get at is the ethanol content, of course. So like this, we do have a 91% match, despite our taste profile being quite bad to start with. But we do have the problem of 45% ethanol versus 30% required. So I'm going to click create here now, and now finally I'm getting to the final point. Let's head over to the bottling. So here we have Pullman's tequila. We managed to do it pretty well. It is a good match for the taste profile. But now we have the problem of ethanol. So let's just pour some water in it, right? That was the solution to everything. And we get a 93% match just without any effort. That was the issue that I pointed out before. What is the solution? The solution is very simple. You decrease the taste profile as you pour other stuff into it. Because if you pour neutral spirits into it, they are, by definition, neutral. That means they don't taste these things. And that means the taste profile needs to be reduced. Water, last time I checked, didn't taste that salty unless you have problems and get your water right from the sea. And yes, that's not going to happen. So this should just outright shrink the entire taste profile. What would happen if it did? Well, then you have to calculate with that for how much ethanol you're going to produce. And optimally, you would want to end up at a taste profile that is a perfect match and an ethanol content that is a perfect match. And that is really damn hard to do. And that's fun. So here we are now bottling something that started out as something completely atrocious with a really good score, 93%. And you see the mechanics are already there, but they're not tied into the other mechanics. So now let's get to the final part. How would that all play out? What are the different things that you would want to observe? And what other mechanics would now finally come into play thanks to these very simple added mechanics or just tweaked mechanics, really? The first point just leads to something very simple. It allows the player to not be blocked artificially by some arbitrary limitation of taste profile match. As you have seen, everything that comes after this step has massive effects on the taste profile anyway, so why limit the player here? This is just a barrier that doesn't need to be there. A warning? Yes, especially for new players. That is important, but not locking the player out of it. So here, nothing really would change. It would just allow you to continue with some, let's say, more spicy, wrong recipe matches. The second point, the new temperature for the fermentation selection. In that one, I've already shown you this little graph here with my solution to how the taste points appear or not appear. That would make it such that you have no way around the next puzzle, which is selecting the various slices of your produce during distillation. That makes that puzzle highly relevant. But now also think ahead to the very last point I made. This also influences this step, because instead of now just looking at how much can I get out of this by maximizing the mash, what you also have to think about is how much ethanol do I end up with if I maximize the mash? And how much do I need to scale it down so that I later on have a more or less correct match for the ethanol content of what I'm looking for? That will make all of a sudden this choice matter. And it would matter a lot. If the overall taste profile is just shrunk by having to pour into it some neutral spirits or water, then I would be extremely careful in what cuts I do select, because we are now at 42%. I have used a lower amount of mash in this one than what I could have, thus I'm pretty close. And now I have to choose, how do I get rid of this extra taste? I do want to add as little as possible in ethanol in the final step. What that means is that you want to generally overshoot in creating the taste profile that you're looking for, so that you can remove some of those cuts and you have a little bit of flexibility of getting the correct ethanol content, so that you then, well, you have to remove some, but then also pour in the right amount so that you get to the right amount of ethanol without destroying further your taste profile. And that overall seems to be like a really tricky and entwined mechanic. all of a sudden, this really starts to matter. Unlike right now, where it doesn't at all. And it highlights the this puzzle. But also the next puzzle. Because now that we have... I can just take this one on, right? I do want to make it slightly weaker. So I would have to remove a slice that is of high ethanol content. Something like this one, for instance. And there we have the 40% that we are looking for. No longer matching the taste profile, though. So I should have overshot a bit. And just as a side note, as a part of these suggestions, I would then also suggest to up the effect of the yeast slightly. They have straight up multipliers to the taste profile, so it is literally a 5-minute job to change this. Just change them to be a little bit higher than the required taste profiles, because they are matched to the various degrees of recipe difficulties, that they always can end you up with the perfect matches. But with these slightly changed mechanics that are much more incorporating all the game mechanics into the same thing, that can be changed. They can be broken free and be slightly non-optimal, but that allows the other mechanics to flourish. So now that we have the correct ethanol content, we would be able to just go to the final step and either choose to not touch the profile, because we got the ethanol content more or less right, in this case exactly right, or make use of that we have carefully crafted our taste profile such that we can dilute it with water and get to the exactly right profile. This overall ties all the existing game mechanics together. There is now nothing with these 3 changes. There's now nothing in these core mechanics that is made obsolete or unused. And that is exactly what you should be striving for. As you're building up your game complexity, as you're unlocking technologies like these flame rates, this flame rate stuff and so on, what you don't want to do is take away the old mechanics. And this game at the moment does exactly that. As soon as you hit the end game, the game becomes a walk in the park. There's no challenge anymore whatsoever. Because the only thing that you need to do at the moment is to match the first taste profile, and after that, you're done. It's just a chore to click through. With these changes that I'm proposing, it would retain the quality of the actual puzzle pieces that there are, and put it together to something that is rather enticing. And I hope you would agree. I have plenty more suggestions of this kind here, but not quite as significant as these. And I think these 3 points would be the biggest hitters to make, out of what is already there, a really damn good game. A great game, even. Alright, that's it. I hope you enjoyed, and see you guys next time.